Hi, folks. With Tacitus today, your pushback channel. Thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue, and this is maybe a little bit complicated, but I'll do the best I can, about preordained profit budgeting by producers and manufacturers and so on, as versus market-driven conditions. Now, there's a claim by many that when, say in the United States, if the administration of President Trump is successful in evicting most or all of the illegal aliens living in the United States, which is estimated to be 25 million or even more, that if they get most of those evicted, that the prices of a whole lot of things will come down, particularly things like prices of property and food and so on. And this will result in a much lower cost of living for American taxation, because there's so much tax money being put into looking after these illegals that if that tax money is either saved, that is, people have to pay less tax, or alternatively, the money is turned into useful public services, which in turn offset the cost of living, for example, lower public transport costs or things like that. So, but will that happen? Just because millions of people, whether it be in Australia or America or elsewhere, just because millions of illegals or parasitic migrants are deported and remigrated and whatnot, will that result in lower prices? And do we actually live in a market conditions economy anymore, or is it most of the economy is now structured around preordained profit return margins? Now, I'll sort of go into a few things here. Now, I remember the days when Australia had a complete telecoms monopoly. There was one company supplying the telecoms. That's it, one, and it was a complete and total monopoly. So, and I remember reading articles that people were using the telephone less, and so this monopoly was starting to lose revenue because people were using the telephones less, and so they had to increase price. So this article in the financial pages argued because their revenues had declined, they had to increase their prices to offset the declining demand. So they say, well, hold on a minute. When I did economics at college, when I did that, they told me that the way it worked in supply and demand economies, if the demand was falling off, you did things that you could to increase the demand, as in get more users or the existing users using your services or buying more of your products. So in a market economy, you'd lower the prices in order to create more demand, or you'd increase the amount of services, or you'd go on a big advertising blitz or something like that. But you do what you could to boost the demand of the product. But in a monopoly, you don't do that. The easy, quickest, cheapest way is just to increase prices, and problem solved, problem fixed. You now have got more revenues than you had, and so you don't need to sweat and wring your hands and have late night meetings or something about what you're going to do to increase prices. Hey, in the story. Now, I also noticed this there was an oligopoly and a cartel of electricity suppliers in Australia, and they said as the take up of solar, solar panels on the roof and so on, but as the take up of solar was so good, they were going to have to increase the prices of electricity in order to offset the reduced demand created by all these solar panels. So now, any high school sort of commerce student could have told them, if you're going to create less demand by for generate electricity, you're going to create less demand by putting solar panels. What are you going to do when that demand declines? What provisions have you put in place today to deal with that in the overall business planning of things? And it seems they've done absolutely nothing. And so they all shrugged their shoulders, and in unison, they just all increased their prices. They didn't have to do anything business-like or anything clever or so. They just increased their prices. End of story. Now, the same thing happened with the green energy and all that sort of stuff. The whole way, whether it be wind farms or whatever it might be, as more and more money was given to these projects by the electricity companies, no less, and because the take-up rate on the alternative energy technology was so low, they decided that they would simply increase prices for the use of like coal-fired type electricity, and that would fix it. But what about market forces? You say, if no one's taking up the new alternative energy technology, or it's too expensive, then the market forces. Why would you be then charging people who've got no choice? They can't go anywhere else. Why would you be dropping cartel? All of them are increasing prices in unison. That's not market, that's not business. That's just you're just screwing your customers because they've got nowhere else to go. So that paradigm of business, whether it be in finance, whether it be in electricity or this or that, it doesn't matter. But that is now dominating all the Western economies, groceries and so on, real estate, insurance, finance. It's all coalesced around effectively a cartel pricing model, so that if your profits are down, all you have to do is increase prices. So, now, consider when COVID and in and around COVID, and COVID was used as a backdrop excuse for a whole lot of things, the cover story. But the food manufacturers and food producers and distributors, and it didn't matter whether it was heavily processed foods or things like eggs or bread or milk or entry-level products or top-of-the-range meat. It didn't matter. Prices just increased astronomically. 40, 50% price increases more in some categories. It's COVID. But the argument, actually, the essence or the kernel of the argument that all these companies put forward was, well, business has dropped off. People are buying less, and so therefore we have to, instead of getting people to buy more or making the product more attractive or lowering the prices, or instead of any of that, we're not going to do any of that, which is what you would do in a market-driven economy. Instead of that, we're just going to all increase prices in unison. We'll all across the board price increases. So people have nowhere else to go. It's not like there was, say, 5 companies are competing in, I don't know, breakfast cereal, say. So the 5, 6 companies all competing for the business there, but they all raised their prices in unison at the same time. How did that happen? Did they all get in the room together and just to say, let's do this? But they weren't. Market forces weren't driving it. Demand was declining, but instead of responding to that by making their products more attractive, less expensive, more accessible, instead of that, they just all increased their prices at the same time. And those prices haven't come back down since, the COVID and all that stuff went away. So they're just taking it in as profits. Now, if you deport, say, in the United States, you end up deporting all these illegals and other parasites and so on, 20-odd million, 25 million, then you're going to get a drop in demand for a whole range of things, housing and so on, food and the like. So what will you do when you're selling less product, or that fewer people are coming around to rent your property, or fewer people are coming around to inquire about buying the property you got for sale? What are you going to do? And effectively, the property market has ceased to be an individual transaction with the property owner or the landlord or whatever, or the people trying to sell the property or rent it. It's ceased to be a situation where they negotiate directly with a buyer and they reach an agreement. That's pretty much gone out the window. Effectively, real estate is now corporate controlled, largely corporate. You're told, well, this is the price you have to, rent your property for. This is the price you have to sell it for, pretty much. And there's very little wiggle room that goes into that. There used to be, and it used to be individual to individual, but it's now been fully corporatized. So what if, tens of millions of people are evicted from the United States, rightly so, justifiably so, they're there illegally. What happens then when that happens, assuming it comes to pass? will that actually have an effect? It'll have an effect on market forces, that we know, so we don't need to debate that. But will it have an actual effect on pricing at the end, given how corporatized and cartel-based nearly the entire Western economy is now? You look at government public-private partnerships, where an investment infrastructure firm builds a road or a bridge or a tunnel or something like that. If you read those clauses, if you read the agreements that these people are signing up to, they want supernormal profits. They demand supernormal profits. And if they don't get the level of profit they want, then the taxpayer, via the government, the taxpayer is obligated, not do you want to and maybe can we talk, is obligated by the contractual terms to actually pay, give the money to these consortiums, give the money to ensure the not just a profit, not just a decent return, but a supernormal profit. So they want staggering profits and they want them guaranteed. They want to have a zero risk business prospect and a guaranteed mega profit. Otherwise, it's no deal, buddy. Now, that's clearly not a good deal for the taxpayer or anybody. Only the consortium people themselves are making the profits. Now, if you look at the money, the executives in these consortium, all of whom are parasitic flunkies, by the way, if you look at the money they're paid, these guys are getting paid millions of dollars a year for just sitting on top of something that's a monopoly, a guaranteed monopoly with a guaranteed profit. And they don't have to make a single business decision or respond to any market conditions. They can sit back and watch the money go pouring in and don't have to do anything to make it other than corruptly bribe government officials or something. So we need to be looking at when the mass migration thing kicked off in the very early stages. We still had primarily a market economy, but in so many ways, whether it's affirmative action or DEI, cartels, monopolies, oligopolies, secret cozy government contracts, it doesn't matter. But the end result is that we have a cartel-driven economy now. If we look at the businesses that went bankrupt during COVID, for example, they were the only competitive businesses that were left in the economy, and they were disproportionately. Nearly every bankrupt business was in that category. Any of the businesses in the cartel side of things, where they could increase prices with impunity, they all survived. In fact, they increased their profits during that time. But the restaurant down the end of the road, the takeout food shop around the corner, the corner stores, all those sort of things, they're the ones that were bankrupted, not the cartel type stuff. So we need, I think, to ask ourselves, even if there is mass migration and repatriation, do we still need to do a lot of work to return the economy, Western economies, and take them away from cartel control, which is the globalist, writ large, take it away from cartel control and return it back to the consumer and a market-driven economy? You've been with Tassus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.